to I Love This Thing So Freaking Much, a podcast about passion. My name is Sophie Katz, and today I am joined by David, a writer. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you. Thank you.
So here's how this works. David will have 3 minutes to talk about something that he loves. This can be a person, place, thing, concept, activity, anything he wants. Our only requirement is that he loves it wholeheartedly and wants to tell us why. Are you ready, David?
As I'll ever be.
Good. Got my timer here. Now, what do you love so freaking much?
Okay, so it's a video game called Panzer Dragoon, originally for the Sega Saturn. It's it's called a rail shooter. Basically, you are moving as if on a rail into the depth of field and facing off against waves of enemies. There are a lot of things I like about it. It's kind of hard to pin down. So first of all, the setting is this kind of strange alien world that it doesn't really explain itself at all. There's kind of overall like an iceberg effect happening where you see a lot of stuff. You see all these alien landscapes and strange machines and mysterious ruins and fantastical creatures. And there's a sense that it's all part of something bigger, but the game never actually tells you what it is. It just kind of leaves it as a big mystery because your character is pretty much just some random guy who gets swept up into things. So kind of like the player, he doesn't know a whole lot and is just almost along for the ride. You play the game flying on the back of an armored blue dragon. So that's already just, objectively cool. And then the dragon breathes homing lasers, which kind of gives it that sort of weird, what I'm looking for is just this sort of sense of like unbounded fantasy, where anything is possible. Like there's no real limits on the environment or the things that can happen in it. The story is really understated. Basically, you get swept up into this conflict where you're chasing a black dragon throughout the game, and you're trying to prevent it from getting to this ancient tower full of all sorts of nasty weaponry and prevent major disaster in wherever this world is. And so you're just going, and that's basically how the game plays out. There's a lot of visual storytelling as the environment around you changes from level to level to kind of show where you're going. It does a great job of giving you a sense of just this mysterious place that used to be really high tech, but is now just in total ruin. I like the look of the technology and the way it's portrayed. It has this kind of almost organic look to it, which kind of makes it seem a little bit mystical at times as much as it is just pure science. And that also kind of heightens the effect of being in this really alien place where nothing is really familiar. What else? There's also, if I'm being honest, a certain amount of nostalgia. This was a game that came out in 1995 at the beginning of what's usually called the 5th generation of console video games for the Sega Saturn, which was the first system of that generation.
Go ahead and finish your thought.
Basically, there's sort of a sense of wonder to it, both in the game story and also because of its age being at the advent of 3D as a standard for how games were rendered. That makes it just makes me remember when I was young and seeing this game and just having my mind blown.
That's awesome. Thank you for telling us about Panzer Dragoon today.
No problem. I can probably be convinced to talk about it endlessly if you don't stop me. So
that is the whole point of this show. Can you tell me a little more about what you remember of your first experiences playing this game? Like, how was it first introduced to you, and maybe what your first impressions were of it?
So the very first time I saw it, actually, I was in Toys R Us, and I saw the sequel on like one of the kiosk displays, and it looked really cool. Mm-hmm. And then a friend of mine had the PC version that he loaned me, which really hard to get running today. You have to do a lot of fiddling with your computer settings to make it work. What's always jumped out at me is honestly just the very first level of the game. Like, so you have this cut scene in the beginning, which shows you getting basically like you're a hunter and you see these 2 dragons fighting in the sky, and the blue dragon rider gets killed. And so the blue dragon sweeps down, and the rider kind of gives you his mission right before he dies. And so you take up his gun and you hop on the dragon and away you go. And then the game starts. Ooh. And you're flying basically over the ocean, like a shallow sea. And you see like rock formations and these ancient ruins kind of popping up out of the water. And it's just ocean to the horizon, like where as far as you can see, it meets, which is where the ocean meets the sky, and you can't even really tell where the two separate anymore. And so you have wildlife, like these creatures that will fly in and will attack you just because you're in their territory, and then you have actual enemies. But like a game can't give you the experience of actually flying over the ocean and feeling the sea breeze and the salt in your face and all that, but it can suggest those kind of things to you, and I just think it does a really good job of that. The music helps. The music for the first level is like, if you were going to be riding on the back of a dragon, this is probably the kind of thing that would be playing in your mind. It's just
Uh-huh.
really like upbeat and bombastic's not the word I'm looking for, but it's the first thing that comes to mind. It's just really like almost like celebratory of what you're doing. I mean, there's danger and there's mystery in the whole thing, and it gets darker and stranger as you go. But just that first level, there's a sense of real wonder of at what you're doing, at where you are, at what's happening around you. And I mean, there are times I'll boot up a copy of the game just to play that one level, because that's just what I need. It's just that kind of initial hit of something big and wondrous and adventurous and exciting and exhilarating.
It sounds like this game has like the perfectly constructed call to action. Like, hey, player, who is also this character, it's time for adventure. Get on the dragon, go fly. We're not going to tell you anything else. Just go and do and enter the amazingness. Sounds like an amazing experience.
Yeah, pretty much. And it's really inviting too. Like, the controls are really simple. Kind of had to be, because again, it's an early 3D game, and a lot of developers are trying to figure out how do we even make this work for people who are used to playing games in 2D. So it's very much pick up and play. Like, it doesn't take more than, I would say, a few minutes to really figure out, okay, so this is how I maneuver within the area that I've got to maneuver. This is how I attack. This is how I work the targeting system. And then it's just constantly like iterating on the things that you do. And there's like this gradually escalating challenge. So even as simple as it is, it's never really boring, between the fun of playing it and the just the entertaining nature of the story.
I'm really interested by the combination of science fiction and fantasy elements. Like you've got aliens, but you've got dragons, but specifically it's a dragon that breathes laser beams instead of fire. Can you talk a little more about that crossover? Maybe some ways this shows up in the technology or the aliens, just in interesting ways.
So there's a theory, and I don't think it's ever confirmed anywhere, and because there's like 3 games that take place after this, and one of them is a role-playing game. There's a theory that the series takes place on Mars, but it's like a future Mars that's been either terraformed and is starting to decay again, or the terraforming never really quite stuck.
Hmm.
But there are like 2 moons in the sky that you'll see occasionally. So there's that much at least, but everything else though looks fairly, it's just Earth-like enough that it looks familiar, but then it's populated by all these creatures that you've never seen before. Like, there's a desert level where you have these gigantic kind of like sandworm things that have like chitin plating, almost like insects, and are like burrowing through the sand and jumping up and attacking you and all sorts of stuff. So like things that look kind of like something you might have seen, but radically different. So the way it's described is a lot of these monsters are basically genetically engineered, or they started off as something that was genetically engineered and then mutated when everything kind of went to pot. In the background of the story, there's like an empire that's kind of trying to gather this ancient technology together and make it work again and make things more habitable for people, but they're not exactly nice folks either. So it's kind of like there's not really a good side here. Um, your character's just kind of like a nomad in the desert who's hunting and isn't really allied with anybody in particular. So like I said, it doesn't really explain a whole lot. It just kind of presents things. But yeah, like I said, a lot of the tech stuff kind of looks organic in a way. One of the things that happens before you get called to action is that you get separated from your friends, and you find yourself in this ruin, and you're approached by this gigantic monster that's got like armor plating, that, and part of it's the graphics because they're kind of primitive, so you don't, it's harder to like distinguish, this is like a fleshy texture, this is stone, this is plastic, this is metal. It all kind of has that sort of, I don't want to say plasticky look to it, but that kind of actually helps the effect, because you don't really know what it's made of. You don't really know, is this a machine? Is this a living creature? Is this some combination of the two? I don't know, but it's big and it's going to stomp me to death. And then suddenly the dragons come flying through, and just the crossfire between them annihilates this creature and saves your skin. And then so there's this kind of harrowing sense of just going from thing to thing to thing, and hanging on for dear life.
Yeah, in my experience of these like games with the waves of enemies, it doesn't really give you a whole lot of time to catch your breath, like maybe between levels. But other than that, it's just, okay, got to learn on the fly, got to go survive, which probably adds to the immersive experience of the game.
Yeah, yeah, and like, and it starts out inviting. Like, it's not immediately going to try to cave your head in with the difficulty. It starts off giving you plenty of fairly easy enemy formations and stuff until you figure out, how the lock-on system works, so you can target multiple enemies and fire your homing laser and stuff. And then by the end, it does get pretty fiendish. You got all sorts of stuff coming at you, and projectiles and enemies, and just like barely have time to take in what you're seeing, but in a good way.
Is there anything that you don't like about Panzer Dragoon? And if so, how do you handle that?
The series as a whole is difficult to get a hold of. Like, this was again a Sega Saturn game. The Saturn was not a popular system. It did not do well sales wise. There is a remake that's available for the Switch and the PS4. I don't know if it's on the Xbox or PC, but I know it's on those two systems. The remake has much nicer graphics, although there's a part of me that thinks that the old school 3D graphics actually work in its favor because they make it a little bit abstract, which kind of helps that sort of like strange alien feeling. But the new version looks really nice. I can't really complain about it at all. It would be weird to make a game that looks the way that Panzer Dragoon does today. Like, it would be very deliberately retro, and I'm not sure how well that would go over. So yeah, difficulty in tracking down a copy that's not the remake, if that was your jam, is going to be kind of hard to do. But those are the only things that really bother me about it.
That might add a little bit to that sense of nostalgia you mentioned you have about the game.
Yeah. Getting a hold of the games all happened for me very much after the fact. I didn't have the system when it was new. I wound up getting it many years later and buying the games individually. And that's the other thing too. They're expensive, because anything worth having on the Saturn is going to be expensive. And so there was kind of that feeling of like completing a collection and like, finally I've got it, I can go through the whole thing and kind of enjoy it that way. But yeah, like, that's the only real downside is the rarity and the difficulty of getting it, not of playing it.
David, thank you so much for telling us about something you love today.
Anytime.
And thank you, our listeners, for tuning in today. If you would like to learn more about Panzer Dragoon or our guest David, you can find his social media information in the episode description. And don't forget to use the hashtag #LoveThisThingCast to tell us about the things you love. I Love This Thing So Fricking Much is a production of Through the Window Media. This episode was directed and edited by Sophie A. Katz. You can find us at Through the Window on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or Tumblr. That is THROU The Window at all the social media sites. Be good to yourself, be kind to each other, and you'll hear from us again soon.